I never thought my heated barn would become the subject of a neighborhood war. But then again, I never expected to deal with Patricia Henderson and the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA either. My name is Nathan Irving, and I had just purchased 15 acres on the edge of Meadowbrook Estates in rural Kentucky, right outside of Lexington. The property was unique because while technically part of the HOA boundaries, it was grandfathered in as agricultural land from before the development existed. That meant I could keep livestock, operate farm equipment, and basically run a small agricultural operation without the typical HOA restrictions that plagued my neighbors. Or at least, that is what I thought when I signed the papers. The barn came with the property, a massive structure built in the 1940s that the previous owner had maintained beautifully. When I moved in last September, I decided to invest in a proper heating system for it. Winter in Kentucky can be brutal, and I was planning to expand my small livestock operation. I had 3 dairy goats, 2 alpacas, and a small flock of chickens. The heated barn would keep them comfortable and healthy during the cold months, and it would also serve as a workshop space for my woodworking hobby. I spent nearly $20,000 on the heating system, insulation, and electrical upgrades. The barn looked fantastic when everything was finished in late October. The animals loved it, and I was proud of what I had accomplished. That pride lasted exactly 3 weeks. Patricia Henderson showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning in mid-November. She was everything you would imagine from an HOA president, perfectly styled blonde hair despite being in her late 40s, expensive athleisure where that had never seen actual exercise, and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Nathan, hello," she said when I opened the door. "I hope I am not catching you at a bad time." "Just feeding the animals," I replied, wiping my hands on my jeans. "What can I do for you?" "Well, I wanted to discuss a wonderful opportunity for community building," she said, and I should have known right then that trouble was coming. "Several of our residents have expressed interest in hobby farming, and when they heard about your beautiful heated barn, well, they thought it might be wonderful if you could share the space." I stared at her. "Share my barn?" "Yes, exactly," she said, her smile widening. "We have the Petersons who would love to keep a few chickens, the Wangs who are interested in rabbits, and Susan Miller has always wanted goats. Your barn is so large, and with that heating system, it would be perfect for everyone's animals. We would work out a schedule, of course, and everyone would contribute to the utilities." "Patricia, that is not how livestock works," I said slowly. "You cannot just have multiple people keeping different animals in the same barn. There are biosecurity concerns, disease transmission risks, and my operation has specific regulations I have to follow." "Oh, I am sure we can work something out," she said dismissively. "After all, you are part of the Meadowbrook community, and we believe in sharing resources. It is what makes our neighborhood so special." "The barn is on my property, which I own," I said firmly. "It is not a community resource. I am sorry, but I cannot accommodate other people's animals here." Her smile finally dropped. "I see. Well, I will have to take this to the HOA board. We will be in touch." She left, and I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I received a formal letter from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. It was 3 pages long, citing various covenants and restrictions that supposedly required me to allow equitable use of enhanced agricultural facilities by other residents. The language was deliberately vague and confusing, clearly written by someone trying to sound legal without actually having any legal standing. I called my real estate attorney, Marcus Chen, the same one who had handled my property purchase. "Nathan, this is complete garbage," Marcus said after I read him the letter. "Your property is explicitly grandfathered in. The agricultural exemption is in your deed. They have absolutely no authority to demand you share your barn. So what do I do?" "Write them back. Cite the agricultural exemption in your deed and tell them to pound sand. Politely, of course." I followed his advice and sent a carefully worded response explaining that my property's agricultural status meant it was exempt from this particular HOA demand. I thought that would settle it. It did not. Patricia showed up again the following Monday, this time with 2 other board members in tow. Robert Carlson was a retired accountant who seemed to view every interaction as a balance sheet that needed adjusting in his favor. Linda Myers was newer to the board, and she looked uncomfortable to be there. "Nathan, we received your letter," Patricia said, standing on my porch like she owned it. "And frankly, we are disappointed in your lack of community spirit." "This is not about community spirit," I said. "This is about property rights and agricultural regulations. I cannot legally do what you are asking." "That is ridiculous," Robert interjected. "It is just a barn. You are being selfish." "Robert, it is not about being selfish. I have livestock regulations to follow. The Kentucky Department of Agriculture has specific rules about biosecurity, animal housing, and facility management. I cannot just open my barn to whoever wants to store their hobby animals here." We checked, and there is nothing in Kentucky law that prevents sharing agricultural space, Patricia said smugly. That is when I realized she had done just enough research to be dangerous but not enough to actually understand what she was talking about. "Actually, you are wrong," I said. Under Kentucky revised statutes, specifically the sections dealing with livestock management, any facility housing livestock must have a single point of management responsibility for biosecurity protocols. That is me, for my barn, for my animals. If I allow others to house their animals here without proper oversight and documentation, I am liable for any disease outbreak, cross-contamination, or welfare issues that arise. I had spent the weekend doing my own research after getting Marcus's advice. Linda spoke up for the first time. "Patricia, maybe he has a point. My cousin has a horse farm and she is always talking about biosecurity." Patricia shot her a look that could have melted steel. "We will be consulting with our own experts. This conversation is not over." They left, and I went back to my routine, hoping that would be the end of it. It was not. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated. Patricia started a neighborhood email chain discussing the fairness of my heated barn. She conveniently left out all the facts about agricultural regulations and property rights, instead painting me as a selfish newcomer who refused to share resources with the community. Several neighbors stopped waving when they drove by. I got dirty looks at the local grocery store. Then the fines started. The first citation came for having agricultural equipment visible from the road, which violated some obscure aesthetic covenant. The equipment in question was my tractor, which I needed to maintain my property. The fine was $500. The second citation was for excessive animal noise, because my rooster crowed in the morning. That was another $500, even though my property was zoned agricultural and roosters were explicitly allowed. The third citation claimed my fence did not meet HOA standards. Never mind that it was the same fence that had been there for 30 years before the HOA even existed. Another $500. I called Marcus again. "They are harassing you," he said flatly. "This is clear retaliation. We need to respond formally and put them on notice that you will pursue legal action if this continues." Marcus sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA, pointing out that none of their citations were valid given my property's agricultural exemption. He also noted that their pattern of harassment could constitute targeted discrimination. That seemed to quiet things down for about a week. Then, Patricia made her biggest mistake. She filed a complaint with the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, claiming that I was operating an unsafe livestock facility and that my refusal to allow other residents to use my barn was creating a monopoly on agricultural resources in the neighborhood. I found out about this when Agricultural Inspector Thomas Reynolds showed up at my property on a cold December morning. He was a stocky man in his 50s with a weather-beaten face and a no-nonsense attitude. "Mr. Irving," he asked when I answered the door. "That is me. I am Tom Reynolds, Agricultural Inspector for Fayette County. I received a complaint about your livestock operation. Mind if I take a look around?" "Not at all," I said, grabbing my coat. "What is the complaint about?" "Someone claimed you are running an unsafe facility and that you are preventing other community members from properly housing their livestock," he said, checking his clipboard. I almost laughed. "Inspector Reynolds, I would be happy to show you everything. And I can explain the situation with the HOA." As we walked toward the barn, I gave him the full story. His expression grew increasingly annoyed as I explained Patricia's demands. "So let me get this straight," he said as we reached the barn door. "Your HOA president wants you to let random neighbors house their animals in your barn, and when you explained the biosecurity concerns, she filed a complaint with my office." "That is exactly what happened." He shook his head. "Let me see your setup." I opened the barn doors and we went inside. The space was warm and well lit. My goats were in their designated area, the alpacas had their own section, and the chickens had a separate coop built into the corner. Everything was clean, organized, and clearly well maintained. Tom walked through slowly, checking feed storage, water systems, ventilation, and animal health. He took notes and asked questions about my management practices, vaccination records, and feeding schedules. After about 45 minutes, he turned to me. "Mr. Irving, your facility is excellent. Better than most operations I inspect, to be honest. Your animals are healthy, your biosecurity protocols are solid, and everything is up to code." "Thank you," I said, relieved. "Now, about this sharing situation your HOA wants," he continued. "That would absolutely violate livestock regulations. You cannot have multiple uncoordinated parties managing animals in a single facility. It creates massive biosecurity risks, liability issues, and welfare concerns. If you did what they are asking, I would have to cite you for violations and potentially shut down your operation until it was brought back into compliance." That is what I tried to explain to them. "You have their demand in writing." "I have several letters." "Good. I am going to document all of this in my report. I am also going to send a letter to your HOA explaining exactly why their demand is not just unreasonable, but would actually violate Kentucky agricultural regulations. What they are asking you to do is literally illegal from an animal welfare and biosecurity standpoint." I could have hugged him. Tom was true to his word. Within a week, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA received an official letter from the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. Tom sent me a copy. It was beautiful. 2 pages of regulatory explanation that concluded with a clear statement that any attempt to force me to share my barn facilities would result in violations that could lead to fines and the closure of my operation. I thought surely that would end things. Patricia Henderson proved me wrong once again. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. At the next HOA meeting, which I attended specifically to defend myself, Patricia stood at the front of the community center and addressed the 40 or so residents who showed up. "As you all know, We have been trying to work with Nathan Irving regarding the shared use of his heated barn facility, she began. Unfortunately, Mr. Irving has been uncooperative, and now he has gotten some bureaucrat at the Agriculture Department to back him up with threats. That bureaucrat is an agricultural inspector doing his job, I called out from my seat, and he explained exactly why what you are asking is illegal. Illegal is a strong word, Patricia said. I think it is more accurate to say that he found an excuse to protect your monopoly on agricultural resources. Patricia, I do not have a monopoly. Anyone in this neighborhood can build their own barn and keep their own animals, just like I do. What you are asking is for me to give up control of my property and violate state regulations in the process. We have consulted with our own agricultural expert, Robert Carlson announced, standing up, and he says there is nothing wrong with shared animal housing. Who is your expert? I asked. That is not relevant, Patricia said quickly. It is completely relevant, I countered. Because the state agricultural inspector, whose job it is to enforce these regulations, has said in writing that what you want is illegal. So who is your supposed expert? Linda Myers looked uncomfortable. Patricia, maybe we should reconsider this. The letter from the state was pretty clear. We are not reconsidering anything, Patricia snapped. This is about community values and fairness. An older gentleman in the back raised his hand. His name was George Martinez, and he had lived in Meadowbrook longer than anyone else. Patricia, I have been in this community for 15 years. When we incorporated the HOA, we specifically acknowledged that Nathan's property, which was the old Henderson farm, would retain its agricultural exemption. That was in the original HOA charter. You cannot just change that because you want to. The bylaws can be amended, Patricia said. Not retroactively, George replied, and not in a way that violates state law. The meeting devolved into arguments after that. Some residents sided with Patricia, believing I should be a team player and share my resources. Others, particularly those who had been around longer, understood the legal and practical issues with what the HOA was demanding. Nothing was resolved, but I left feeling like at least some people understood the situation. What happened next, I did not expect. 2 days after the HOA meeting, I came home from a trip to the feed store to find my barn door wide open. I had definitely locked it that morning. My stomach dropped as I ran inside, checking on my animals. Everyone seemed fine, but I noticed immediately that the heating system thermostat had been cranked up to 90 degrees. In December, with good insulation, that would have turned the barn into a sauna. My goats were panting, clearly overheated, and the chickens looked distressed. I immediately lowered the temperature and opened the vents to cool things down, then checked each animal for signs of heat stress. Thankfully, I had only been gone for about 2 hours, but if I had been gone longer, the consequences could have been serious. Overheating can kill livestock quickly. I called the Fayette County Sheriff's Office and filed a report. Deputy Sarah Mitchell came out to take my statement. So someone broke into your barn and turned up the heat, she asked, writing in her notepad. Yes, and I have a pretty good idea who might be responsible, though I cannot prove it. The HOA situation you mentioned. Exactly. Do you have any security cameras? Not yet, but I am installing them today. Good idea. I will file this report, but without evidence of who did it, there is not much we can do right now. If it happens again and you have video, we can pursue charges. I spent the rest of that day installing a comprehensive security camera system around my barn and property. I got 4 high-definition cameras with night vision covering every entrance and angle. The system uploaded to cloud storage automatically, so even if someone destroyed the cameras, The footage would be saved. It turned out to be a very wise investment. 3 days later, at around 2 in the morning, my security system sent an alert to my phone. I woke up and checked the live feed to see 2 figures approaching my barn. They were wearing dark clothing and had their hoods up, but the infrared cameras captured everything clearly. I watched as they tried the barn door, found it locked, and then proceeded to break the lock with bolt cutters. They went inside, and I could see them on the interior camera. One of them went straight to the heating system and shut it off completely. The other one opened the exterior vents and propped the doors open. It was December in Kentucky. The overnight temperature was 23 degrees. If I had not caught this, my animals could have frozen by morning and the water pipes in the barn would have burst, causing thousands of dollars in damage. I called 911 immediately. "There are 2 people breaking into my barn right now," I told the dispatcher. "I have them on camera. They are tampering with my heating system and endangering my livestock. Are you in a safe location? I am in my house, watching on security cameras. Stay inside. Deputies are on their way." I kept watching the cameras. The 2 figures seemed to be taking their time, clearly not expecting to get caught. One of them appeared to be taking photos with their phone. They were documenting the barn interior, which struck me as odd for vandals. The sheriff's department response time was impressive. Within 12 minutes, I saw the red and blue lights reflecting off the barn walls on camera. The 2 intruders panicked and tried to run out the back entrance, but they ran straight into another deputy who had come around the rear of the property. I grabbed my coat and headed outside as the deputies were bringing the 2 suspects around to the front. When I got close enough to see their faces, my jaw dropped. One of them was Robert Carlson, the HOA board member. The other was a younger man I recognized as Jake Peterson, one of the residents who supposedly wanted to keep chickens in my barn. "Mr. Irving, are these the individuals you saw on your camera?" Deputy Mitchell asked. She had been one of the responding officers. "Yes, absolutely. I have the whole thing recorded." "These are serious charges," Deputy Mitchell said, turning to Robert and Jake. "Breaking and entering, criminal trespassing, vandalism, and reckless endangerment of livestock. You gentlemen want to explain what you were doing." Robert's face was red with either cold or embarrassment, probably both. "We were documenting safety violations. We have a right to protect our community." "You have a right to nothing on private property without the owner's permission," Deputy Mitchell said sharply. "And what safety violations?" "We have a report from the state agricultural inspector saying this facility is up to code." Jake was smarter and kept his mouth shut, but Robert kept digging himself deeper. "The HOA has authority to inspect properties within our jurisdiction. Not agricultural properties with specific exemptions, and definitely not at 2 in the morning by breaking in," another deputy said. "You are both under arrest." Watching them get handcuffed and put into the back of separate patrol cars was surreal. I gave my statement and provided the security footage to the deputies. They told me I would need to come to the station the next day to file formal charges and provide a complete copy of all the video evidence. The story got better, though, or worse, depending on your perspective. When the deputies searched Robert and Jake, they found detailed notes about the barn layout, photos they had taken, and text messages between them and Patricia Henderson. The messages made it clear that Patricia had coordinated the whole thing. She had specifically told them to shut off the heat and open the vents to show how unsafe the facility becomes without proper monitoring. She had essentially ordered them to endanger my animals to prove some insane point about barn sharing. Deputy Mitchell called me the next morning. "Mr. Irving, based on the evidence we found, we will be arresting Patricia Henderson as well. She conspired to commit these crimes, and her text messages show clear premeditation. We will need you to come in and review everything for the district attorney. Patricia Henderson was arrested at her home that afternoon. The local news picked up the story because it was too bizarre not to cover. HOA president arrested in barn break-in scheme ran on WLEX Lexington that evening. By the next morning, it had gone regional, and by that afternoon, I was fielding calls from national news outlets. I declined most of the interview requests, but I did give a statement to the local reporter who broke the story. I kept it simple and factual. The HOA had demanded I share my barn in violation of agricultural regulations. I had refused. They had retaliated with harassment and eventually criminal activity, and now they were facing the consequences. The fallout was swift and dramatic. Within 48 hours, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board held an emergency meeting. Patricia was removed as president immediately. Robert, who was also on the board, was forced to resign. Linda Myers became the interim president, and one of the first things she did was issue a formal apology to me on behalf of the HOA. She called me personally as well. "Nathan, I am so sorry about all of this." I tried to speak up, but Patricia was so domineering, and honestly, I did not realize how far she would take things. "I appreciate the apology, Linda. This whole situation got out of control. We are going to be revising the HOA bylaws to make absolutely clear that your property's agricultural exemption is permanent and unquestionable. We are also implementing new oversight measures to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again." That sounds good. I hope we can all move forward from this. The criminal cases moved through the system relatively quickly. All three defendants, Patricia, Robert, and Jake, were facing multiple charges. Their attorneys tried to negotiate plea deals, but the district attorney was not in a generous mood. The case had gotten too much publicity, and there was clear video evidence of everything. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that she never intended for the animals to be harmed, but the text messages told a different story. She had specifically calculated that shutting off the heat and opening the vents on a freezing night would cause stress to the animals that would require veterinary intervention, thus proving the facility was unsafe without constant monitoring. The fact that she knew exactly what would happen made it premeditated animal endangerment. The trial happened in March, about 4 months after the arrests. I had to testify, which was nerve-wracking but necessary. The prosecutor was a sharp woman named Amanda Foster, who walked me through everything that had happened, from the initial demand to share my barn all the way through to the break-in. "Mr. Irving, in your professional opinion as a livestock owner, what would have happened to your animals if you had not discovered the heating system being shut off when you did?" Amanda asked during my testimony. "Objection, speculation," Patricia's attorney called out. "Your Honor, Mr. Irving is qualified to answer based on his experience managing livestock," Amanda countered. "I will allow it," the judge said. With the outside temperature at 23 degrees and all the vents open, the barn interior would have dropped below freezing within a few hours, I explained. "My goats and alpacas could have developed hypothermia. The water systems would have frozen, leaving them without water. The chickens, being smaller and more vulnerable to cold, could have died from exposure. At minimum, I would have been looking at serious animal welfare issues and expensive veterinary bills. At worst, I could have lost animals." And what did the agricultural inspector say about the defendant's plan to have multiple community members share your barn? He said it would violate Kentucky livestock regulations, and that he would have to shut down my operation if I did it. Multiple parties managing animals in a single facility creates biosecurity risks that state law specifically prohibits. The defense tried to paint me as an uncooperative neighbor who refused to compromise, but the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage showed everything clearly. The text messages proved coordination and intent. The agricultural inspector's report confirmed that what they wanted me to do was illegal. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Patricia Henderson was found guilty of conspiracy to commit breaking and entering, conspiracy to commit animal endangerment, and criminal mischief. Robert Carlson and Jake Peterson were found guilty of breaking and entering, criminal trespassing, animal endangerment, and criminal mischief. The sentencing happened 2 weeks later. Patricia received 18 months in jail, 3 years probation, and was ordered to pay restitution for my security system, vet bills for stress checks on my animals, and my legal fees. The total came to about $37,000. Robert got 12 months in jail and 2 years probation, with similar restitution requirements. Jake, because he was younger and this was his first offense, got 6 months with work release, 2 years probation, and a smaller restitution amount. All 3 were also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Kentucky, which I thought was a nice touch. The civil lawsuit came next. Marcus Chen filed suit against the HOA itself for harassment, discrimination, and creating a hostile environment. The new HOA board, led by Linda Myers, was actually cooperative. They acknowledged wrongdoing, and their insurance company settled quickly for $75,000 to avoid a drawn-out legal battle. I used that money to expand my livestock operation, adding a second barn and increasing my herd. I also donated $10,000 to a local agricultural education program in the name of Inspector Tom Reynolds, who had been so helpful throughout this ordeal. Life in Meadowbrook Estates gradually returned to normal. The story became legendary in the area, a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and why you should never mess with someone's livestock. I actually became somewhat friendly with several neighbors who had been quietly supportive throughout the ordeal, but had been afraid to speak up against Patricia. George Martinez, the older gentleman who had spoken up at the HOA meeting, became a particular friend. He had a fascinating history as a former rancher and enjoyed visiting my animals. We would sit in my heated barn on cold evenings, drinking coffee and talking about livestock management, and the old days before the neighborhood had been developed. Linda Myers turned out to be an excellent HOA president. She was reasonable, followed the rules, and actually cared about making the community better rather than just exercising power. Under her leadership, the HOA finally approved the updated bylaws that explicitly protected my property's agricultural status. They even added language protecting any future agricultural properties from similar harassment. The local news did a follow-up story a year after the arrests, checking in on how everything had turned out. They filmed at my property, showing my expanded operation and healthy animals. The reporter asked if I had any regrets about how everything unfolded. "I wish it had not been necessary," I said honestly. "I wish Patricia and the others had just accepted the legal and practical reasons why I could not do what they wanted. But I do not regret standing up for my property rights and the welfare of my animals." Sometimes you have to draw a line and defend it, even when it is difficult. The barn that had caused so much trouble continued to serve its purpose beautifully. My goats produced excellent milk that I sold to a local cheesemaker. The alpacas provided fiber that I sold to spinners and crafters. The chickens gave me more eggs than I could use, so I sold the extras at the farmer's market. My little agricultural operation was thriving. I even started teaching workshops on backyard livestock keeping, helping people understand the legal and practical requirements of keeping animals. Several neighbors from Meadowbrook attended, including the Petersons and the Wangs, who had originally wanted to use my barn. After taking my workshops and understanding the complexity involved, they decided that keeping livestock was more than they wanted to take on, which was probably for the best. Susan Miller, who had wanted goats, did follow through. She built her own small barn on the back of her property and got 2 Nigerian dwarf goats. I helped her get set up properly, and we developed a good friendship. She often joked that she got what she wanted in the end, just not the way Patricia had planned. The criminal cases had lasting impacts beyond just the defendants. The story prompted the Kentucky legislature to pass new protections for agricultural properties within HOA boundaries. The law, informally called the Meadowbrook Act in the news, clarified that HOAs could not impose requirements that conflicted with state agricultural regulations and added penalties for HOAs that harassed residents over legitimate agricultural activities. I was invited to testify before the State Agriculture Committee when they were considering the bill. Standing in the Capitol building in Frankfort, telling my story to legislators, was surreal. But the law passed unanimously, and the governor signed it with a ceremony that I attended. Knowing that my experience would protect other farmers and livestock owners from similar harassment felt good. Patricia Henderson served her full sentence. I heard through the grapevine that she moved away after being released, going to live with family in Indiana. Robert Carlson stayed in the area but kept a very low profile. Jake Peterson actually reached out to me after completing his sentence, apologizing for his role in everything. I accepted his apology. He had been young and stupid, following Patricia's lead without thinking through the consequences. Everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. My property became something of a destination for people interested in small-scale agriculture. I started hosting quarterly open barn days where people could visit, learn about the animals, and ask questions about livestock keeping. It was my way of giving back and promoting agricultural education. The events were popular, and I made connections with other farmers and homesteaders in the region. 2 years after the whole ordeal began, I was sitting in my heated barn on a cold January evening, working on a woodworking project while my goats drowsed in their heated stall and the chickens roosted peacefully overhead. The barn was warm and comfortable, exactly what I had envisioned when I installed the heating system. My phone rang. It was Marcus Chen. "Nathan, I wanted to let you know that the last restitution payment just came through. You are officially done with all the legal and financial aspects of this case." "That is great news, Marcus. Thanks for everything. You handled this whole situation with a lot of class. Most people would have been much more vindictive. I just wanted to protect my property and my animals. I never wanted anyone to go to jail. They made their choices." "Well, you have become quite the local celebrity. I have had 3 potential clients contact me specifically because they saw how I handled your case." I laughed. "Glad something good came out of it for you." After hanging up, I sat there in the quiet barn, listening to the contented sounds of my animals and the hum of the heating system that had started this whole mess. The barn that Patricia Henderson had demanded I share was mine, operated according to proper regulations and filled with healthy, well-cared-for livestock. Sometimes standing your ground is the right thing to do, even when it is hard. Property rights matter. Agricultural regulations exist for good reasons. And HOA, no matter how powerful they think they are, cannot override state law or basic common sense. My heated barn had become a symbol of all those things. It was more than just a building. It represented the right to use your property as intended, to follow your passion for agriculture, and to push back against unreasonable demands from those who think they have authority they do not actually possess. As winter deepened and the temperatures dropped further, I spent many evenings in that barn. I finished woodworking projects, read books while my animals slept nearby, and sometimes just sat and appreciated the space. Every time I adjusted the thermostat or checked on the animals in their warm, comfortable quarters, I thought about how different things could have been if Patricia had gotten her way. The barn would have been chaos. Multiple owners trying to coordinate animal care without proper training or biosecurity protocols. Disease spreading between species. Arguments over feeding schedules and space allocation. Regulatory violations that could have shut down my legitimate operation. And ultimately, animals suffering because of human stupidity and ego. Instead, my barn was a model of proper livestock management. Inspector Tom Reynolds used it as an example when training new inspectors, bringing them by to show what a well-run small operation looked like. Agricultural students from the University of Kentucky visited as part of their coursework. I had created something good, and I had protected it when it was threatened. The Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, under Linda's leadership, actually became a model for other HOAs dealing with agricultural properties. Linda was invited to speak at HOA conferences about proper governance and respecting legal boundaries. She always credited the disaster with Patricia as teaching her what not to do. Sometimes the best lessons come from the worst situations, she told me once. What happened with Patricia was terrible, but it forced us to completely rethink how the HOA operates. We are better for it now, even though it was painful getting here. She was right. The neighborhood had learned and grown from the experience. Residents were more aware of property rights and legal boundaries. The new HOA board was more careful and deliberate in its actions, and there was a greater appreciation for the agricultural heritage that my property represented. My 15 acres remained a working farm in the middle of a suburban development, a reminder of what the land had been before the houses came. Kids from the neighborhood would stop by during my open barn days, eyes wide with excitement at seeing goats and alpacas up close. Many of them had never encountered farm animals before. I like to think I was providing education and connection to agriculture that they would not have gotten otherwise. As spring arrived and the weather warmed, I reduced the heat in the barn but kept the system maintained and ready for next winter. The animals transitioned to more outdoor time, enjoying the pastures that were greening up. Life on the farm followed its natural rhythms, undisturbed by HOA drama or legal battles. I expanded my garden that spring, planting vegetables and herbs. The goat manure made excellent fertilizer, and I was working toward a more integrated farm system where everything supported everything else. It was satisfying work, building something sustainable and productive. One afternoon in April, I was working in the garden when a car pulled up my driveway. I did not recognize the vehicle, a newish sedan with out-of-state plates. A woman got out, probably in her 30s, looking around with interest. "Can I help you?" I asked, standing up and brushing dirt off my gloves. "Are you Nathan Irving?" she asked. "I am." "My name is Jennifer Walsh. I am a reporter with Modern Farmer magazine. I have been following your story, and I would love to do a feature article about your operation and what happened with the HOA, if you would be willing." I had turned down most media requests, but Modern Farmer was different. It was a respected agricultural publication that focused on farming issues and sustainable agriculture. This was not tabloid journalism looking for a sensational story. "What angle are you thinking for the article?" I asked. "I want to focus on the intersection of agriculture and suburban development, the legal issues that arise when farm properties are surrounded by HOAs, and how the Meadowbrook Act might protect other farmers. Your story is a perfect case study." We talked for a while, and I agreed to the interview. Over the next few weeks, Jennifer visited several times, photographing the farm, interviewing me and some of my neighbors, and even speaking with Inspector Tom Reynolds and Marcus Chen. The article came out in the summer issue, a 6-page spread with beautiful photos of my barn, animals, and the surrounding property. The article was titled "Standing Ground: One Farmer's Battle Against HOA Overreach and Why It Matters." It was fair, well-researched, and put the whole situation in a broader context of agricultural law and property rights. The response was overwhelming. I got emails from farmers across the country who had dealt with similar issues, thanking me for fighting back and setting a precedent. One email particularly stood out. It was from a small dairy farmer in Colorado who had been battling his HOA over livestock restrictions. He attached a copy of the Meadowbrook Act and a letter his attorney had sent to his HOA, citing my case as precedent. The HOA had backed down immediately. His operation was safe, and he credited my willingness to fight as saving his farm. Reading that email in my barn, surrounded by my healthy animals in their well-maintained facility, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The whole ordeal had been stressful, expensive, and sometimes scary. But it had mattered. It had changed things for the better, not just for me but for others facing similar challenges. The heated barn that had started everything stood as a testament to standing up for what is right, even when powerful people try to force you to back down. Patricia Henderson had tried to bully me into submission, to force me to compromise my operation and violate regulations because she thought she had the authority to do so. Instead, she had gone to jail, lost her position, and become a cautionary tale. As summer turned to fall and the nights started getting cooler again, I prepared the barn for another winter. I serviced the heating system, checked all the seals and insulation, and made sure everything was ready for the cold months ahead. My herd had grown. I now had 6 goats, 4 alpacas, and an expanded flock of chickens. The barn that Patricia had wanted to turn into a chaotic community animal warehouse was instead a thriving, well-managed agricultural facility. One evening in October, exactly 2 years after I had finished installing the original heating system, Linda Myers stopped by. She had stepped down as HOA president after successfully reforming the organization, and her replacement was continuing the reasonable, balanced approach she had established. "I wanted to thank you again," she said as we stood outside the barn, watching the alpacas graze in the evening light. "You could have sued the HOA into oblivion after what Patricia did. A lot of people would have. Instead, you gave us a chance to make things right." "The HOA is not the problem," I said. "HOAs serve a purpose when they are run properly. Patricia was the problem. Once she was gone, the organization was able to function the way it should. Still, you showed a lot of grace. The neighborhood is better because you are part of it." After she left, I went into the barn and started the evening feeding routine. The animals knew the schedule and were already gathering, making their various noises of anticipation. The barn was comfortable, peaceful, and exactly what it should be. My heated barn was no longer a point of conflict. It was just a barn, doing what barns are supposed to do, sheltering animals and supporting a small agricultural operation. The fact that it took arrests, trials, and new legislation to secure that simple reality was absurd, but that was the world we lived in. I had learned a lot through this experience. I had learned about agricultural law, about standing firm when you are right, about the importance of documentation and evidence. I had learned that bullies often back down when you stand up to them, but sometimes they escalate instead, and you have to be prepared for that. I had learned that communities can heal from internal conflict if people are willing to do the work. Most importantly, I had learned that doing things the right way, following regulations, and respecting the reasons those regulations exist matters. The agricultural inspector had not backed me up because he liked me or because he was corrupt. He backed me up because I was following the law and best practices, while Patricia was demanding that I violate both. As winter set in again, my third winter in the property, the heated barn performed perfectly. The animals were comfortable, healthy, and productive. The system I had invested in and fought to protect was paying dividends in animal welfare and peace of mind. When temperatures dropped below zero on the coldest nights in January, I would check the barn camera on my phone and see my animals sleeping contentedly in their heated spaces, and I felt satisfied. The story of my battle with the Meadowbrook Estates HOA eventually faded from public attention, as all stories do. But the impacts remained. The Meadowbrook Act protected agricultural properties across Kentucky. My case was cited in legal briefs and court filings in other states. Other HOAs thought twice before trying to overstep their authority with agricultural landowners. And in Meadowbrook Estates itself, there was a new understanding and respect for property rights and legal boundaries. The disaster with Patricia had taught everyone valuable lessons. The community was stronger for having gone through it and come out the other side with better governance and clearer rules. 3 years after the arrests, I sat in my barn on a cold February evening, working on a new project. I was building raised garden beds for Susan Miller, who wanted to expand her backyard farm beyond just goats. As I measured and cut lumber, my goats dozed nearby, and the chickens made soft nighttime sounds from their roost. The barn was warm, exactly 72 degrees according to the thermostat that had caused so much trouble. The heating system hummed quietly, doing its job without drama or conflict. This was what it had always been meant to be, a comfortable space for animals and work. Nothing more complicated than that. Patricia Henderson had tried to make it into a symbol of her authority and vision for community sharing. Instead, it became a symbol of property rights and the limits of HOA power. The heated barn that she demanded I share remained mine, operated according to regulations, and proof that sometimes the right thing to do is simply to say no and stand behind that decision no matter what comes. My livestock operation continued to grow and thrive. I added sheep to the mix, expanding into fiber production. The farm became more diverse and more productive with each passing season. And through it all, the heated barn that started everything remained the center of operations, warm, efficient, and entirely mine to manage as I saw fit. That is how it should be, and thanks to standing firm when it mattered most, that is how it would always be.